أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد أشرف المرسلين وعلى صحبه أجمعين ومن اتبع لسنته إلى يوم الدين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته يا أيها الإخوة والأخوات. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. I greet you with the greeting of Islam, which is to say, may the peace and blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be upon you. And after that greeting, inshallah, we send peace and blessings upon his messenger Muhammad ibn Abdullah al-Hashimi al-Qurayshi al-Arabi Khatim al-Nabiyyin, and the last of the messengers, Imam al-Mursaleen. He's the seal of the prophets and the Imam of the Mursaleen and the Imam of those who were sent. We continue, inshallah, with our lessons of Mukhtasar al-Akhdari, the abridgement of Imam al-Akhdari's work in morals, purification, and prayer. Right now, we are in the section that relates to purification. We finished the section on ghusl within that larger section of purification. And today we're about to do the section on tayammum. Since we're going to do the tayammum section in one go, from its preconditions, its fara'id, its obligations, its sunan, its sunnahs, its recommended acts, and we're going to do it all in one go, so there's no need for us to review last week's lesson in the way that we normally do, because in any given lesson we go over the text and then we go over the text twice. We go over the text the first time and then we go over the text the second time. The third time is usually within the subsequent lesson. But if we're to do that on this tape, it's going to take up quite a bit of time. So, inshallah, we'll just begin straight into the section on tayammum. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فصل في التيمم. He says this is the section on tayammum. Tayammum is what we call in English dry ablution. It's called dry ablution because it's as though you're making ablution but without water. Tayammum linguistically means to aim for something. So it's as though you're aiming for wudu because you don't have water, and there's reasons why you might not have water or you can't use water. So you do tayammum. You aim at what would normally be done, which is wudu. You understand? But when we're referring to it in the sacred law and we translate it to English, tayammum, we translate it as dry ablution as opposed to aiming, which is its linguistic root. He says, وَيَتَيَمَّمُ الْمُسَافِرُ فِي غَيْرِ مَعْصِيَةٍ. He says the person that's traveling is allowed to make tayammum so long as he's not in a sinful travel. If he's in a situation where he can't find water, or water is gonna be, or the finding of water would take him to the exit of the prayer. So it's not just any traveler. If a traveler has water next to him, it's not that he has a choice of saying, okay, I don't want to use water, so therefore I'm not going to, I'm just going to do tayammum. You know, he has to have valid excuses, such as that's he's drinking water and he can't afford to dispense with it, such as that's the water that he needs to feed his horse or to give drink to his horse and he can't dispense with it, or such that there is no water. In that case, when he's a traveler, then he can do tayammum. But in today's age, just because you're a traveler doesn't mean you're allowed to do tayammum, because in today's day and age, more often than not, if you're in an airplane, there's a place to make wudu. When you're in the airport, there's places to make wudu. When you're on the road, there's rest stops. You know, most of us carry large quantities of water, so we're not going on month-long foot trips. You understand? But in the case where water is scarce and you're on the road, then you're allowed to make tayammum. He says, but that trip, it has to be on the condition that you're not taking a trip for something that's disobedient. So if you're going to Las Vegas to gamble, for example, even if there's no water on your way, then you're not allowed to make tayammum, is what he's saying. But this is a prohibition of ikrah, of dislike, right? So he can still do tayammum, but the essence of it is that he should not be traveling to do something that's disliked in the first place, right? Now, so the first line he says is that وَتَيَمُّمُ الْمُسَافِرُ غَيْرِ مَعْصِيَةٍ. He says that وَيَتَيَمَّمُ الْمُسَافِرُ فِي غَيْرِ مَعْصِيَةٍ, that the person that's traveling can do tayammum so long as his trip is not towards something that's disobedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, وَالْمَرِيدُ لِفَرِيدَةٍ أَوْ نَافِلَةٍ. The person that's sick can perform tayammum for both his nawafil, for both his fara'id, his obligatory prayers, and his nawafil, and his secondary prayers, meaning his supererogatory prayers, his optional prayers. You understand? So a person that's sick, because he can't use water, then that person is allowed to use tayammum not only for his fard, but also for his nawafil. You understand? He says, وَيَتَيَمَّمُ الْحَادِرُ الصَّحِيحُ لِلْفَرَائِضِ إِذَا خَافَ خُرُوجَ وَقْتِهَا. He says, and a person that is healthy and he's present, meaning he's not traveling, he can make tayammum for his fard prayers, his obligatory prayers. إِذَا خَافَ, if he's scared, or if he fears خُرُوجَ وَقْتِهَا, that the time of the prayer will exit. So if he fears that the time of the prayer will exit before he can finish his wudu, then he can make tayammum, even though he's healthy and even though he's not traveling. So the root of tayammum is that it's designed as a concession for a person that's traveling and water is scarce during his travel route, as it was in the past, or the person that is not traveling but he's sick and water will either exacerbate his condition or it will make him make his recovery take longer, or water will make him sick. You understand? So in the case of those people, they're allowed to use tayammum. And tayammum, it has to be redone at every prayer. So you can't do tayammum for the one tayammum for Fajr and then use that same tayammum for Dhuhr and then use that same tayammum for Asr. Each time, because the thing is, the conditions of tayammum, they could be disappeared within each prayer, right? So for example, by the time Dhuhr comes, you could get better. By the time Dhuhr comes, you could find water if you're not a person that can find water. You understand? Now, so he says, وَيَتَيَمَّمُ الْخَادِرُ الصَّحِيحُ لِلْفَرَائِضِ إِذَا خَافَ خُرُوجَ وَقْتِهَا. He says the person that is healthy and that's not a traveler, he's allowed to perform tayammum for his obligatory prayers in the case that he fears that if he performs wudu, the time of the prayer will pass him by. So let's say sunrise is at 7 o'clock, and we know that the time of Fajr is up until sunrise, and you wake up at 6:57 or 6:58. You look at the alarm; it's 6:58, and you know that if I go into the bathroom and perform just the fard of wudu, not even like the recommended acts of the sunnah, it's just the fard of the wudu: wash my face, wash my arms, wipe my head, wash my feet. You know that by that time it's going to be 7:01 or 7:02, and the sun is going to come up. In that case, you would perform tayammum and you pray without the wudu. He says, وَلَا يَتَيَمَّمُ الْحَادِرُ الصَّحِيحُ لِنَافِلَةٍ وَلَا جُمْعَةٍ وَلَا جَنَازَةٍ إِلَّا إِذَا تَعَيَّنَتُ عَلَيْهِ الْجَنَازَةِ. He says, but the person that is healthy and he's a resident. So when he says hadir, al-hadir is the opposite of a safir. The safir or musafir. Musafir is a traveler that's on the road. The hadir is a person that's resident where he's from or where he's residing. He says that person, وَلَا يَتَيَمَّمُ الْحَادِرُ, the person that is resident, as-sahihu, and that's healthy, he has no health reason to perform tayammum, he would not perform tayammum لِنَافِلَةٍ. He would not perform it for nawafil action, so for nawafil salawat. So he can't just get up and say, you know what, I want to pray 10 rakahs right now, let me do tayammum and do it. No. And he doesn't do it either. وَلَا جُمَعَةٍ, he doesn't do it for Jum'ah either. وَلَا جِنَازَةٍ, and he doesn't do it for the funeral prayer. إِلَّا إِذَا تَعَيَّنَتُ عَلَيْهِ الْجَنَازَةِ, except if the janazah is headed towards him and he happens to be there. So in that case, he performs tayammum and he prays the janazah prayer. So he's saying that the person that is healthy and has no reason to do tayammum, the person that's healthy and that he's resident, then that person doesn't perform nawafil, extra prayers with tayammum, just these obligations. You understand? Now, so now he tells us the obligatory elements of tayammum. He says, well, fara'idu tayammum. He says, now as for the obligations of the tayammum, they're as follows. An-niyatu, the first is that that you have to have the intention. So as with any action of worship, there has to be an intention to perform that action. It doesn't have to be stated. It just has to be an intent within the heart to go perform that action. That's it. Understand? وَالصَّعِيدُ الطَّاهِرُ. وَالصَّعِيدُ الطَّاهِرُ is pure earth. And in the next little section, he's going to describe to you what exactly is as-sa'id al-tahir. وَمَسْحُ الْوَجْهِ, and then also to wipe the face. You don't have to roll around in the dust, but just literally touch whatever it is lightly and then wipe your face. You understand? You don't have to throw dust on your face. ومسح اليدين إلى الكوعين, and then إلى الكوعين, and then also to wipe the hands up until the wrists. That's another. That's another part of the obligation of tayammum. He says, وَضَرْبَةُ الْأَرْضِ الْأُولَى, and also to touch the earth for the first time when you're beginning the tayammum, because that's what you're touching, the earth or whatever object that you use, whatever is as-sa'idu tahir, whether it's earth, whether it's mud, whether it's a rock, you touch it for the first time is wajib, so that you can wipe your face and wipe your hands. He says, وَالْفَوْرُ, and to do it in one setting, to do one continuous setting. So it's the same as wudu, you don't chop it off into parts. He says, and this is very important, he says, وَدُخُولُ الْوَقْتِ and وَإِتِّصَالُهُ بِالصَّلَاةِ. These are two conditions that are important. He says that first and foremost, it's an obligation for tayammum that the time of salah has come in. So if the time of dhuhr hasn't come in, you don't perform tayammum and then say, okay, dhuhr is about to come in 10 minutes, I'm going to perform tayammum now, and then after that 10 minutes I'll pray. No, you have to wait until dhuhr comes in, and then the condition that would render you to have to do tayammum would come in by virtue of the prayer coming in. Because if the prayer hasn't come in, and you're sick, there's nothing that you're doing tayammum for, because tayammum is a concession for an occurrence that happens once the prayer occurs. The prayer time has occurred, and I don't have any water, and I can't find any water. Okay, now do tayammum. But the prayer time hasn't come yet. Even if I know I won't have any water, something could change. So therefore, when the prayer time comes in, and you have that knowledge that nothing's going to change, you have that knowledge that it's going to be like this, I'm not going to find the water, I'm going to be sick, I'm going to stay sick, then you do the tayammum. But beforehand, if you do tayammum before that, your tayammum is not valid for that prayer. That's the first of those two conditions. And the second one, وَإِتِّصَالُهُ بِالصَّلَاةِ, is that the tayammum has to be attached to the prayer. You understand? So as soon as you perform the tayammum, it's like, I'm going to go pray. Right? I perform the tayammum, I head inside the masjid and pray. I perform the tayammum, I'm in my house, I prayed it in there. So it's not that you perform the tayammum and you sit around for 40 minutes. Oh, the dhuhr came in at 2 o'clock, okay, I know I have to do tayammum. I perform tayammum, and then, I wait 30 minutes and then I pray. That tayammum is not valid. You understand? Now he's going to describe to you what is as-sa'id. What does he mean by like earth? You understand? Because earth is a very wide category. He says, وَالسَّائِدُ هُوَ التُّرَابُ. He says, earth is first and foremost things like dirt, right? When we say dirt, I don't mean dirtiness, but dirt, like the dirt that you see on the ground when you're walking. Like, for example, if you're in Africa, there's a lot of dirt, a lot of quote-unquote sand. You know what I mean? وَالطُّوبُ, and adobe. Adobe is a type of earth that you find in places like, in certain places like New Mexico. It's a type of like red clay that naturally is produced from the earth. He says, وَالْحَجَرِ, and stones, rocks are also part of the earth, right? وَالثَّلْجُ, ice or snow, that's also part of the earth, right? So if you have literally a block of ice in the wintertime in Toronto, you can do tayammum with that, وَالْخَدْخَاد is mud, you can use mud as well. وَنَحْوُ ذَلِكَ, and other things like that naturally emerge from the earth, things that are naturally found on the surface of the earth, right? Like sand, right? Like you're in the mountains and you use a mountain rock, you know what I mean? Like volcanic rock, what was I gonna say? Like salt mounds that come from the earth, right? Things like that. And some people, they say metals, but metals are not included in this, right? So those type of things are considered as-sa'id. You can use them for the purpose of making tayammum because they naturally are present on the surface of the earth. You understand? They are the earth itself. He says, وَلَا يَجُوزُ بِالْجِسِّ الْمَتْبُوخ. He says it's not permissible to do tayammum with plaster. Like basically plaster is, they take the material and they recycle it, and then they make it into, like the walls in your house is plaster. So you can't do tayammum with that. He says, وَالْحَصِيرُ, like straw. So if you have straw, you cannot do tayammum with straw. وَالْخَشَبْ, wood, you can't do tayammum with wood either. وَالْحَشِيش, you can't do tayammum with grass. وَالنَّحْوِهِ, and things like that, such as plants, fruits, things of that nature, or just like processed things, right? So like the table, the wood of your bed, right? Things of that nature, you don't do tayammum with that. He says, وَرُخِّصَ لِلْمَرِيدِ. He says, but there's a concession that's given for the person that's sick. في حائط الحجر, with respects to utilizing like cooked rocks, like things that have been baked, like cement, like baked bricks, right? Like bricks that have been baked, watubi, and baked adobe, right? إِن لَمْ يَجِدْ مُنَاوِلًا غَيْرَهُ. If you can't find someone that's going to bring him what would normally be considered as Sa'id al-Tahir. So what he's saying is that in this case, if I'm in my house and I have no one that can bring me a rock from outside, or I have no one that can bring me sand from outside, or I have no one that can bring me mud or ice from outside, and I'm sick, I can't go get it myself, my wall is next to me, my bed is next to me, something I can touch that's of an earthly nature, even though it's processed, then I can touch that and make tayammum with that. That's effectively what it is that you have the excuse to do that. If you don't have the tayammum is an excuse, and there's an excuse to your tayammum, then you go to another category. You understand? The Prophet ﷺ says that dinu yusra. He says the religion is easy. Now he says وَسُنَنُهُ. Now as far as the sunnahs of tayammum, they're as follows. He says تَجْدِيدُ السَّعِيدِ لِيَدَيْهِ. He says is that for when you are wiping your hand, that you touch the earth again, basically. That you touch the earth, because all you have to do for your tayammum to be valid as far as actions after the intention is to touch the earth once, wipe your face, and then wipe your hand up to the wrist. So he's saying in between the wipe of the face and the wipe of the hands is that you return your hands back to whatever the form of earth that you're using, and you wipe up to your wrist. That's a sunnah. He says, وَمَسْهُ مَا بَيْنَ الْكُوعَيْنِ وَالْمِرْفَقَيْنِ. He says it's also a sunnah to wipe what's between your wrist and your elbow, as though you're making wudu. He says, وَالتَّرْتِيب. It's also a sunnah to maintain the sequence, which is to go from the intention to wiping the face, intention, touching the ground, wiping your face, touching the ground, and then wiping your hand up until your elbow, which is the sunnah. The obligation is just up until your wrists. He says, وَفَضَائِلُهُ. He says, now as far as the beneficial or the recommended acts, I should say the recommended desirable acts of tayammum, he says they're as follows. At-tasmiyah is first and foremost to say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim when you're beginning. He says, وَتَقْدِيمُ الْيُمْنَى عَلَى الْيُسْرَى. He says, and to begin with your right hand, is to begin with your right hand على اليسرى, as opposed to your left hand when you're wiping your hand. وَتَقْدِيمُ الظَّاهِرِ الذَّرَائِ عَلَى بَاطِنِهِ. And to prioritize the outward, is to begin with the outward part of your limbs as opposed to your hand. So the outside of your hand, then the inside. The outside of your arm going to the elbow, then the inside. You understand? وَمُقَدِّمِهِ عَلَى مُؤَخِّرِهِ. And to begin with the beginning part of your limb and going towards the bottom part, its ending part. So to go from the tip of your fingers all the way down to the elbow. So what you would do is, if you were doing tayammum and you've wiped your face now, you touch the earth again the second time, you start going from your fingertips on the outside of your hand, right? And then you go to the wrist, and then you go all the way to you go to the wrist, and then you come back and you wipe the wrist from the inside, and you go to your fingertips. Then from your fingertips, you go from the fingertips all the way to the outside of the elbow, and then you come inside and you come back all the way down, up until your wrist, and then you do the same for your left hand as well. He says, وَنَوَاقِدُهُ. He says now the nawaqid, the things that nullify your tayammum, he says kal-wudu. He says it's the same as when it comes to wudu, right? So if you fart, you urinate, if you blow wind if you urinate, if you defecate, things of that nature, they nullify your wudu, right? He says, وَلَا تُصَلِّي فَرِيدَتَانِ بِتَيَمُّمٍ وَاحِدٍ. He says, you're not allowed to perform two fardu prayers, two obligatory prayers with one tayammum. As I mentioned earlier, you have to renew the tayammum for each time that you want to pray an obligatory prayer. He says, وَمَنْ تَيَّمَّمَ لِفَرِيدَةٍ. He says, whoever performs tayammum for an obligatory prayer, he says, جَازَ لَهُ النَّوَافِلُ بَعْدَهَا وَمَسُّ الْمُصْحَفِ. He says it's permissible for him to pray the nawafil that are attached to that prayer and to touch the Quran in that situation, right? So basically, for example, if I pray at Isha and I'm sitting in a masjid, right there with tayammum, I can read the Quran, I can pray Shafi'i wal Witr, and things of that nature. He says, وَالطَّوَافُ وَالتَّلَاوَةُ إِنَّوَا ذَلِكَ. He says, and likewise, to perform tawaf and to recite the Quran, if you had intended that, وَإِتَّصَلَتْ بِالصَّلَاةِ, and you attach it to the prayer, وَلَمْ يَخْرُجِ الْوَقْتِ, and the prayer time has not exited. So for example, I'm in the haram. I can't make wudu for whatever reason. This is rare today, but it can happen. It's a situation that's possible. I made tayammum to pray Maghrib. As I have the intention to also after I finish praying Maghrib to do tawaf around the Kaaba, and I have the intention also to read the Quran after I finish the tawaf. To read the Quran after I finish the tawaf. So I can do all of that so long as the time of Maghrib doesn't leave, and I have that intention beforehand with that same tayammum. But as soon as Isha comes in, I have to renew my tayammum because it's a new obligatory salah. He says, وَجَازَ بِتَيَمُّمِ النَّافِلَةِ كُلُّ مَا ذُكِرَ إِلَّا الْفَرِيدَةِ. He says, وَجَازَ بِتَيَمُّمِ النَّافِلَةِ كُلُّ مَا ذُكِرَ إِلَّا الْفَرِيدَةِ. He says, for the sick person that makes tayammum for a nawafil, for a nafil I should say, it's permissible for him to do everything that we just mentioned as far as tawaf and reading the Quran, illa al-farida, except to perform the obligatory prayer with that tayammum. His tayammum, he has to renew it if he wants to do an obligatory prayer. If he had made the tayammum with the intent of praying the nawafil, because as we said earlier, a sick person, he's allowed to do his tayammum for both the fara'id, the obligations, and the nawafil, and the optional prayers. And then he gives you an example. He says, وَمَنْ صَلَّى الْعِشَاء. He says, whoever prays the Isha بِتَيَمُّمٍ, by doing tayammum, قَامَ لِلشَّفْعِ وَالْوَتْرِ, then he stands up to pray the 2 rak'ahs of Shaf'i wal-Watri. These are optional prayers that are after Salatul Isha. بَعْدَهَا, after Salatul Isha, مِنْ غَيْرِ تَأْخِيرٍ, without any delay. So he can do that. You understand? He says, وَمَنْ, and also the person, وَمَنْ تَيَمَّمَ مِنْ جَنَابَةٍ, and the person that also performs tayammum from the janaba, فَلَا بُدَّ مِنْ نِيَّتِهَا, then there's no issue from that, having that tayammum from that one tayammum, having that intention of that one tayammum to do that extra nawafil prayer that's attached to that prayer. So that's just an example of what he was saying earlier. So inshallah, just to recap, he says, وَيَتَيَمَّمُ الْمُسَافِرُ فِي غَيْرِ مَعْصِيَةٍ. He says the person that's traveling, if he's traveling on a travel that's not disobedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he can perform tayammum based on the fact that if he has fear of his water, or he has fear that, there's of safety with respect to access to water, so long as water is compromised in any way, shape, or form, he can do tayammum. If he doesn't have that compromise, then in today's modern day and age, he performs wudu. He says, وَالْمَرِيدُ لِفَرِيدَةِ أَوْ نَافِلَةٍ. He says the person that is sick, he performs tayammum whether it's for an obligatory prayer or for an optional prayer. He says, وَيَتَيَمَّمُ الْحَادِرُ الصَّحِيحُ. He says the person that is resident and he's healthy, he can make tayammum للفرائض, for his obligatory prayers, إِذَا خَافَ خُرُوجَ وَقْتِهَا, if he fears that the time of the prayer is going to exit before he finishes making wudu or finding water. وَلَا يَتَيَمَّمُ الْحَادِرُ. He says, وَلَا يَتَيَمَّمُ الْحَادِرُ الصَّحِيحُ, and the person that is healthy and resident, he doesn't make tayammum, he's not allowed to make tayammum لِنَافِلَةٍ, for the purposes of praying an optional prayer, meaning strictly for the optional prayer. وَلَا جُمَعَةٍ, or for Salatul Jumu'ah. وَلَا جَنَازَةٍ, or for praying Salatul Janazah. إِلَّا, except if it happens to be إِذَا تَعَيَّنَتْ عَلَيْهِ الْجَنَازَةِ, that a funeral passes right next to him and he's there, and it occurs in front of him. In that case, he can perform tayammum and pray with the jama'ah. He says, وَفَرَائِدُ tayammum, he says, the obligations of tayammum are as follows. النية is the intention. وَالسَّائِلُ الطَّاهِرِ, it's the pure earth. وَمَسْحُ الْوَجْهِ is to wipe your face. وَمَسْحُ الْيَدَيْنِ إِلَى الْكُوعَيْنِ is to wipe your hands up until the wrists. وَضَرْبَةُ الْأَرْضِ الْأُولَى, and to touch the earth for the first time when you're about to wipe your face. وَالْفَوْرُ, and to do it all in one go, as opposed to cutting it up and chopping it in parts, meaning as opposed to like taking breaks and saying I'm going to come back and stuff like that. وَدُخُولُ الْوَقْتِ, and the entrance of the prayer time as well as an obligation. وَإِتِصَالُهُ بِالصَّلَاةِ, and the tayammum has to be attached to the prayer that you're about to perform as well. He says, وَالصَّعِيدُ, and what we define as earth, هُوَ التُّرَابُ, is first and foremost dirt. وَالطُّوبُ is also adobe. وَالْحَجْرُ, and rocks. وَالثَّلْجُ, and ice and snow. وَالْخَدَخَادُ, and also mud. وَنَحْوِ ذَلِكَ, and things like that, such as salt and things like that. He says, وَلَا يَجُوزُ it's not permissible to do tayammum with the following. بِالْجِسِّ الْمَطْبُوخ, with cooked plaster. وَالْحَصِير, or straw. وَالْخَشَب, or wood. وَالْحَشِيش, or grass. وَنَحْوِهِ, and things like that. وَرُخِّصَ لِلْمَرِيدِ, and the person that's sick is given a concession, an allowance. فِي حَائِطِ الْحَجْرِ وَالطُّوبِ, and using baked bricks or baked adobe clay, basically processed forms of rock and earthly materials that are usually used to build houses and things like that. إِن لَمْ يَجِدْ مُنَاوِلًا, if he's not able to find someone that can bring him غَيْرَهُ, something that's other than those items. So if he has no one to assist him in bringing that, and he's sick to the point where he can't go get it himself, then he's allowed to take those items from. He's allowed to take those items that are normally not allowed to be used for tayammum. He says, وَسُنَنُهُ, and the sunnahs of tayammum are as follows. He says, تَجْدِيدُ السَّائِلِ لِيَدَيْهِ, he says, to renew the touch of the earth for when he's wiping his two hands. وَمَسْحُ مَا بَيْنَ الْكُوعَيْنِ وَالْمِرْفَقَيْنِ, and to wipe between his wrists and his elbows. وَالتَّرْتِيبُ, and to maintain the sequence of the tayammum. وَفَضَائِلُهُ, and its desirable acts are as follows. التسمية is to say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَتَقْدِيمُ الْيُمْنَى عَلَى الْيُسْرَى, and to begin with the right hand over the right side over the left side. وَتَقْدِيمُ ظَاهِرِ الذِّرَاءِ عَلَى بَاطِنِهِ, and to begin with the outside of the limb as opposed to the inside of the limb. وَمُقَدِّمِهِ عَلَى مُؤَخِّرِهِ, and to begin with the beginning of the limb over the ending of the limb. He says, وَنَوَاقِدُهُ, and the things that nullify the tayammum, كَالْوُضُوء, is the same as the things that nullify wudu. وَلَا تُصَلَّى فَرِيدَتَانِ, and it's not permissible to pray two obligatory prayers بِتَيَمُّمٍ وَاحِدٍ, with a single tayammum. وَمَنْ تَيَمَّمَ لِفَرِيدَةٍ, whoever makes tayammum for an obligatory prayer, جَازَ لَهُ النَّوَافِلُ بَعْدَهَا, it's permissible for him to perform nawafil, optional prayers, ba'daha, after that salah. وَمَسُّ الْمُصْحَفِ, and likewise touching the mushaf. وَالتَّوَافُ, and likewise doing tawaf. وَالتِّلَاوَةُ, and likewise reading the Quran. If it so happens to be nawa, if he had intended that, وَإِتَّصَلَتْ بِالصَّلَاةِ, and he attaches it to the prayer that he's praying or that he had just prayed. وَلَمْ يَخْرُجِ الْوَقْتِ, and the time of that prayer has not exited, so he can do all those things. So long as he intended it, then he attaches it to the prayer, and then the time of that prayer hasn't left. وَجَازَ بِتَيَمُّمِ النَّافِلَةِ كُلُّ مَا ذُكِرَ إِلَّا الْفَرِيدَةِ. He says, and for the person that makes the tayammum strictly for his nafil, as opposed to the fara'id, it's permissible for him to do all these things that we just mentioned, إِلَّا الْفَرِيدَةِ, except to go back and pray a fard obligation or prayer with that tayammum. He would have to redo his tayammum for that purpose. He says, وَمَنْ صَلَّى الْعِشَاءَ, whoever prays Salatul Isha بِتَيَمُّمٍ, with a tayammum, قَامَ لِلشَّفْعِ, and then he gets up to pray الشَّفْعِ وَالْوَتْرِ, and Salatul Witr. بَعْدَهَا, after that, مِنْ غَيْرِ تَأْخِيرٍ فَلَا بُدَّ مِنْ نِيَّتِهَا, then there's no issue with that intention being attached to. he's final prayer for Isha. Jazakumullah khair, inshallah. We appreciate you, ya ikhwan. Wal akhawat, we ask Allah to from us. Inshallah, jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum.